Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Before I get to Bernard Hopkins' last fight against Joe Smith, let's talk about a story you need to know about. India is a country that's growing by leaps and bounds. Right? Trust me, if you're into economics, and some of you might know that I used to contribute articles, stock articles for seekingalpha.com. India is a country growing at a rate of growth far beyond that of the United States, for example. And one of the big stories in India is Vijender Singh. He's the bronze Olympic medalist from 2008. These days he's at super middleweight. He's an unbeaten fighter with a huge punch. Right? Let's just say he had a fight against Francis Cheka, and you could tell that his punching power convinced his opponent not to continue in the fight. Now, this is that rare fighter who actually has his own YouTube page. He's posted highlights of his fight himself online. I believe I've put some of those highlights in the favorites folder here to my account here. But I want you to go through Vijender Singh's account, right? I think the water is deep at 168 pounds. I think Singh, who is 31 years old, would have a problem with movement. He's also a bit upright. He's a hunter. He hasn't been the hunted too often, right? But he is charismatic. Let's just say that he easily is one of boxing's biggest stories because of the market he's bringing with him, right? Keep a close eye on Indian boxing, folks. It's growing to the bigwigs in boxing, the people with real influence, the promoters, etc. I hope you look at this guy. More importantly, I hope you look at the crowd for Singh's last fight and the level of excitement. Let's shift gears. The big question here, by the way, while I did not expect Bernard Hopkins to lose this match, we were covered because the underdog, Joe Smith, won by KO, and the KO prop was part of the hedge. Right? So today, if you're a gambler, you should have been happy with that pre-fight video. Let me also point out, too, that Bernard Hopkins was winning the fight. He was using his legs. He did look good before getting knocked out of the ring. Let me add, too, I understand there's been an effort by Bernard to claim that he was pushed out of the ring. He wasn't. Right? What he was hit with a couple of left hooks. Joe Smith, who likes to operate in the pocket, has Bernard pinned against the ropes. Bernard is rocked by the left hooks. In other words, the left hooks take Bernard from this to this. Right? Right by the gap in the ropes. So the left hooks knock him so he's aligned with the ropes. Then Joe Smith leans in with a right hand. It's a punch, not a push, that knocks Bernard out of the ring. As Bernard's body's leaning back, going through the ropes, Joe Smith then gets off another left hook. Let me just say this. While I thought Bernard was winning the fight, Joe Smith, who has a day job, looked awfully good. Right? He's pursuing Bernard throughout the fight. He's trying to throw power punches throughout the fight. Understand the Joe Smith agenda was to win by KO. Let me also point out, too, if you're a fan of the light heavyweight division, understand Joe Smith is now part of the conversation. I don't care where he's ranked or all this other mandatory, whatever, voluntary. Look, here's what I care about. The man just knocked out, right, Andres Fonfara and Bernard Hopkins. Right? Knocked them out. He's in the conversation. Let me say too, for gamblers, guys like Joe Smith are especially provocative, because this is a guy who isn't a full-time boxer. Now here he is, championship level. Championship level. Right? I know some are going to say, look, Bernard, hadn't fought for a while and was in his 50s. Trust me, Andres Fonfara wasn't in his 50s. Also, the Bernard Hopkins who showed up yesterday would have beaten most of the contenders. Right? Bernard looked good. He had John David Jackson in his corner between rounds when Bernard comes to the corner. John David Jackson, who's a straight shooter, says to him several times, good work. I can tell you the guys on Box Nation had Bernard Hopkins winning the fight. So Bernard was Bernard. Also understand too, Bernard Hopkins had one of the best chins in the sport. He went the distance with Sergei Kovalev. Right? Went the distance. Well, let me just say he got rocked yesterday. Let's talk about the stories you're going to hear too. To me, it's an open question. It's an open question on whether Bernard Hopkins, when he falls outside the ring, and it's a hard fall, folks. When you see the video, this isn't Bernard falling into a crowd. Right? This isn't Jack Dempsey, Louis Frippo. Right? No, this is Bernard falling out the ring, then falling all the way to the floor. Right? Looks like he falls to the floor head first. Now let me say this. When Bernard gets up, it's an open question on whether he is woozy from the knockdown. The guy eats a couple of hard left hooks. It's an open question on whether he's woozy from the knockdown or whether he hurt his ankle. What I can tell you is you're knocked out the ring, you have 20 seconds to get back in the ring. Right? Not 10, but 20. Bernard falls out of the ring. Bernard gets up. Here's the moment of truth. Right? He gets up off the floor. I'm not a medical doctor, but he looked woozy to me. Right? Not bad ankle. Injured. He looked woozy. He looked like a guy who got hit with some hard shots in the ring. Understand, on a knockdown, the punches you take are only some of the trauma. Right? Many of these guys, after taking shots, then when they fall to the canvas, hit their head on the canvas. That's part of the knockdown. Right? Bernard Hopkins, to me, looks like he's woozy. Not with a bad ankle, but with a bad head. Took a couple of lefts, took a right hand, takes another left as he's on his way out of the ring, then hits his head on the pavement. Right? He doesn't fall into people, he falls on the floor. So then he gets back up and he looks woozy. Now I'll leave it to you. I'm sure by the time this video goes public, some doctor someplace is going to say, hey, Bernard had what looked to be a sprained ankle. I can tell you the doctor there says to him, take off your shoe. Right? The doctor wants to examine his ankle. And Bernard then says, doesn't take off his shoe. Bernard then says, I can walk, I just can't move well, basically. Right? I can't continue. Bernard also claims he's pushed out of the ring. Folks, I look at films as part of these videos. He's not pushed out of the ring, he's punched out of the ring. That's what he is. When he falls outside, and I'm a huge Bernard Hopkins fan, you guys know that. When he falls out the ring and he gets back up, hey, it's not the ankle, folks, it's the head. Then you know what it is? It's the pride. He's just been beaten by a young lion. Right? So I believe Bernard understands when he gets off the canvas Hell, when he gets off the floor outside the ring, he understands, you know what, this young lion has beaten me. Right? He's beaten me. He gets up, he's a little bit woozy. Look, man, you don't want to be woozy with Joe Smith when you're in the ring with Joe Smith. When you're out of the ring and you're trying to get in the ring with Joe Smith, you know it's over. So I question whether Bernard Hopkins would have beaten the 20 count. Right? I think Bernard, maybe he thinks he was pushed out of the ring. I think when Bernard looks at the film, he's going to have to be honest with himself. He was beaten. He was knocked out of the ring. In a way, this is even more jarring than Rocky Marciano, Joe Louis, because in that fight, right, Joe is hurt before he's knocked out the ring. Right? Here, the knocking out of the ring is a bit more sudden. 1 minute, Bernard standing up, he's perpendicular. It's quick, folks. The next minute, Bernard's getting blasted through the ropes. That's the kind of explosive puncher Joe Smith is. As you look at the replay, what I want you to do is to focus on the first 2 punches of Joe Smith's combination. It's 2 left hooks, and you'll notice Bernard can't be knocked out of the ring until after he gets hit with some of these left hands. That's when he leans and he falls into that gap. So when he takes the right hand and he leans backwards, there's no place to go but outside of the ring. Let me just offer my layman's bit of advice to Joe Smith, who to me is a big force now at 175 pounds. Folks, you're not going to find a more exciting fighter at 175 pounds than this guy. If I'm Joe Smith, I try to use this fight to get a title shot. Joe has a puncher's chance. Let's face it too. Joe's in his 20s. Bernard's not the only older guy at 175 pounds. Boxing is a young man's game. The last time I looked, and I encourage the boxing public to look this up, Adonis Stevenson in his 30s. Sergei Kovalev in his 30s. Andre Ward in his 30s. Isn't Lucien Boutte still hanging out there? Right, so Joe Smith literally can go on boxing's equivalent of a senior citizens tour. Right, there are a lot of people out there who he could do some damage against. Now, if I'm Joe Smith, if I'm the people advising Joe Smith, I would just tell him a few things. First, figure out how to avoid having a guy clinch you when you come in on body shots. In other words, he has to figure out a way to dig left hands to the body while using his right hand. And look, I know this is illegal, but, when you're inside and you're digging left hooks to a guy's body and the guy tries to reach and grab you, that right hand has to be there to push him off. Right? Push him off. In other words, don't allow a savvy senior guy to clinch you during moments when you're landing bombs and you have him hurt. So figure out how you're going to do that. I notice Kovalev has a little bit of an arm bar. When he comes in and he's throwing punches, he makes sure he's not so close to you that you can clinch him. Joe Smith needs to figure out how not to be clinched. Understand, he's the hunter. He's the guy doling out the punishment, right? And so guys are going to try to hold on to him to take the steam out. Maybe what he needs to do is, instead of trying to hit guys in the kidney, try to hit them in the solar plexus. It's a little bit harder to clinch a guy when your core is getting hit and you're getting pushed backwards. The other thing too is, look, I know Bernard looked good moving around the ring, but Bernard in his 50s shouldn't have had that much latitude. Right? I want to encourage Joe Smith to look at old films of Roberto Duran. He needs to improve on his ability to cut off the ring. Right? Bernard is able to move away from Joe Smith round after round. That shouldn't happen. Right? Smith needs to, this is the championship level. Smith needs to figure out how to keep an older guy at least in one region of the ring. Right? Finally, let me say this. I know Joe has an excellent right hand. Right? He's laying out Funfaro with that right hand. Smith, though, to me, is more promising punch is that left hook. Right? And to me, he doesn't really frame it or flash it enough. In other words, that left hook is like a sledgehammer. I get the feeling the fighter's more in love with his right hand. No doubt he's probably a righty outside the ring. Right? But he needs to look at the impact that left hook had. If I were him, I would look at Floyd Mayweather tapes. Right? I would look at Vladimir Klitschko against Ray Austin. Right? His left hook is dramatic. He should be figuring out ways to throw it from distance. It would give him a little bit more ring coverage. It would allow him to be a little bit more defensive. It would keep a fighter, an opponent, guessing a little bit. As opposed to keying on the right hand because they know that Joe is not going to, try to pulverize them with the left. As I said, look at the combination that gets Hopkins out the ring. I would argue it's the first two left hooks that really make it happen. Right? Those are the punches that hurt Hopkins. Right? That have him then leaning down so that he can be hit with the right hand that gets him leaning out. Anyway, that's how I see it. Joe Smith by KO. Wow. Right? That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Let me also point out, too, the people at light heavy, based on what I saw yesterday. If I'm Joe Smith, I would think about, well, hell, Joe, you think about whatever you want, right? But if I were you, I would try not to fight a guy who's a mover, right? Just food for thought. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.